Too much low end is eating up your mix. I know everybody wants that punchy kick drum and that loud 808 or bass, but there are ways to achieve this without necessarily cranking up the volume fader. Now, the problem with just turning the volume fader up is that whenever you or somebody else goes to master your song, what's going to be the first thing to happen when the final limiter is put on the track? The low end is the first thing to go. That low end hits the ceiling of the limiter and starts to distort. It starts to sound weak because the final limiter can only take so much. It's going to restrict you from getting your track loud while retaining that powerful kick and bass that you had while mixing the song. So you have to find ways to boost the overall perceived loudness of your low end without actually raising the peak level. You want your kick and bass to sound loud to the human ear without necessarily being loud according to the meters. So let me show you a couple of techniques that I use in order to achieve this. The first technique that I want to show you involves making our bass more apparent in the mid-range. Let's take our 808 from sounding like this to sounding like this. And here's how it's going to sound in regards to the full mix.
The place where I went wrong. No, we all struggle, gotta fight to stay strong. Need to stick to who we are now, even if we fall down. Better luck will come around, just catch it on the rebound. You see how the bigger picture usually just comes together.
Okay, so that was a pretty big difference. Now, the main problem with bass in general is that it dominates the low end in terms of frequencies. And if you want a bass that really jumps out of the speakers like the ones we just listened to, you can't just simply turn the volume up because those lower frequencies are going to cause you problems. But we can make the bass more present in the mid-range so that our ears perceive it to be louder. And the key to this is going to be using distortion. And the trick I'm going to show you is a more advanced approach to distortion that I learned from watching a Jason Joshua video. What you'll need to do is set up an exact duplicate copy of your 808 or your bass. And it doesn't matter which DAW you're going to be working in. Here in FL Studio, you'll see that I have one mixer track dedicated for the original 808, and then I have a duplicate copy of this 808 that's labeled 808 parallel. So let's go ahead and focus on the original copy of our 808. So for the first 808, what we're gonna do is we're gonna roll off all of the higher frequencies in the 808 using this EQ filter right here. So we've isolated our low end and removed all of the higher frequencies above 260 Hertz utilizing this low pass filter right here. And then I also cleaned up some of the low end utilizing this high pass filter right here at 50 Hertz. So everything below 50 Hertz is getting rolled off. Next, I added some compression, and this step is completely optional, but I think it just adds a bit more punch and character to the 808. I'm not going to really break down the settings of this compressor because it's very dependent on the 808 sample that you're using for your beat or your mix. But as always, don't overdo it and trust your ears. You'll see here that I'm only getting about 4 decibels of gain reduction, and I have a very slow attack. So now let's come over to our duplicate copy of the 808 that we've labeled 808 parallel. And what we do on this duplicate copy of the 808 is really where the magic occurs. So we're gonna apply those same exact EQ filters that we used on the original copy of the 808, and we're gonna take those and put them on the duplicated copy of the 808 as well. So we have the low pass filter to take away the high frequencies set here at 260 Hertz, and we had the high pass filter to roll off some of the lower frequencies set at 50 Hertz. Next, we're gonna add some subtle compression just like we did with the original 808. Now, after the compression, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use a distortion plugin, and you can use any distortion plugin that you'd like. This plugin is called the Tube Screamer Guitar Pedal plugin, but feel free to experiment with which type of distortion you apply. What distortion is gonna do is it's gonna add harmonics to our 808. So we're feeding this distortion plugin with only the lower frequencies of the 808, right? Because we isolated the lower frequencies utilizing the EQ filters. Now, when the 808 leaves this distortion plugin, it's gonna have all of these harmonics added to it that will live in the mid-range and make it easier for our ears to hear it. So these are the settings that I like for this specific specific distortion plugin, but again, experiment with which type of distortion you're adding. So now after the distortion, I have another EQ plugin loaded, and I want you to pay attention to the mid-range right here in the middle of the plugin. You're gonna see all of these new harmonics added here on the analyzer. And remember, before the distortion plugin, we removed everything above 260 hertz. We cleaned it up so everything you see here in the mid-range now is gonna be directly added from the distortion plugin. Okay, so you probably saw and heard new information frequency-wise here in the mid-range from all of those added harmonics. So now all we have to do is isolate these newly added harmonics utilizing EQ filters. So you'll see here that I'm rolling off all of the higher frequencies at about 2000 hertz, and I'm rolling off all of the lower frequencies at about 550 hertz. We already have our original copy of the 808 where we isolated the lower frequencies. So by isolating these harmonic frequencies in the mid-range, we're gonna have control over both the low and mid-range frequencies separately, which is gonna allow us to blend the two together volume-wise. Now, the last thing to do is just to blend in the distorted version of the 808 in with the original, so that way you can get the right balance between the two. And this is really gonna depend on the full mix as far as where you want to place it volume-wise. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the full mix with and without the distorted version of our 808 added to the mix.
The place where I went wrong. Know we all struggle, gotta fight to stay strong. Need to stick to who we are now, even if we fall down. Better luck will come around, just catch it on the rebound. You see how the place where I went wrong. Know we all struggle, gotta fight to stay strong. Need to stick to who we are now, even if we fall down. Better luck will come around, just catch it on the rebound. You see how the bigger picture.
Okay, so that is a technique that I like to use in order to boost the perceived loudness of my bass. We didn't have to go crazy by boosting the lower frequencies of the 808 or cranking up the volume fader. Just simple distortion and proper execution of EQ allowed us to bring that 808 to life. So the next technique that I want to show you involves boosting the transient of the kick drum. A lot of times when we want the kick drum to be louder, we actually really just want to hear that top end tickiness of the kick and not necessarily more low end. So I like to use parallel compression in order to bring out that top end transient of the kick drum. So you see here in FL Studio, I have two copies of the kick drum. I have the kick and the kick parallel. So what we're gonna do is focus on the parallel version of the kick drum. The first thing you wanna do is apply heavy compression so that way you squash the kick drum to where it's just one big brick of audio. We don't want any frequency poking out because remember, we have our original kick drum for that. And you can use any compressor that you'd like for flavor, but here I'm using the CLA 76 made by Waves. Let's go ahead and break down some of the settings that you're gonna wanna use for your parallel compression. I have a fast attack and a fast release. The fast attack will compress those sudden peaks in audio as soon as they hit the compressor. And a fast release time is gonna make sure that the compressor lets go of the kick drum before the next kick note hits. I have a high ratio of 12:1 set, so that way I get a lot of compression. I typically aim for about 10 to 20 decibels of gain reduction, so you have to adjust this input knob over here or the threshold accordingly. Let's go ahead and take a listen, and you'll see over here on the gain reduction meter that I'm getting about 10 to 20 decibels. Now the makeup gain you can adjust to taste, but we'll leave it right here and we're gonna come back to it. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna isolate that ticking sound, that top end of the kick. Our ears are gonna hear that and think that the kick is more loud. So utilizing this high pass filter right here on this EQ plugin, what we're gonna do is we're gonna play the kick drum and we're just gonna slowly adjust this until we start to really hone in on that ticking sound. All right, so I ended up right there at about 500 hertz, but sometimes I'll roll it all the way off to about 2000 hertz. It really depends on the kick drum sample that you're gonna use. So let's go ahead and blend our parallel compressed version of the kick drum in with our original kick drum. I'm gonna use the output gain knob right here on the CLA 76 compressor to control the overall volume of our parallel compressed kick. All right, so I think that sounds pretty good right there. Let me go ahead and unmute everything so that way we can hear it in regards to the full mix.
Wrong. No, we all struggle, gotta fight to stay strong. Need to stick to who we are now, even if we fall down. Better luck will come around, just catch it on the rebound. You see how the bigger picture usually just comes together. Even when you feel the pressure, no, it's now or never.
So in essence, you're compressing to get rid of all of the peakiness of the kick, so that way you don't have these sudden spikes in volume whenever you add the duplicated kick drum in parallel. Then you're gonna isolate that ticking sound of the kick drum with this EQ, and then blending it in volume-wise with your original kick. Adding that top end is gonna make it easier for our ears to hear the kick drum without really boosting the overall peak level of the kick. Now we could have just simply boosted the top end of our original kick drum with an EQ, but that would really raise the peak level of our kick. Instead, we compressed and isolated the frequency that we wanted to boost so that way it was controlled. It's all about raising the perceived loudness of a sound without creating more spikes or peaks in audio. All right, so that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the content. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.